I always considered our home to be a fortress. Not in terms of walls and alarms, but in terms of feelings. A place where Alara and I were invulnerable. She is an architect with stormy blue eyes and a smile that could disarm anyone. I am Arthur, a techie, the founder of the company, who preferred code to communication with people. We were the perfect couple. She was the face of our success, I was its driving force. Our business partner, Julian, was the link between us, charismatic, charming, he could sell snow to an Eskimo. We were a team. At least, that's what I thought. Everything fell apart on Thursday. I came home earlier than usual, clutching a velvet box with a sapphire necklace, a gift for our 5th anniversary. I wanted to surprise her. It was a surprise, but not for her, but for me. I heard their voices from the living room. They weren't shouting or laughing loudly. They spoke quietly, businesslike, like conspirators. I froze in the hallway, behind the massive oak door. "One last step," Julian said, his voice low and confident. "Once the board approves the merger, Arthur will be left with nothing." "Won't he suspect anything?" asked Alara. There was no alarm in her voice, only cold calculation. "Arthur?" Julian smiled. "He's too busy with his code to see what's going on right under his nose. He's predictable. That's his main flaw." I leaned against the wall, feeling the air leave my lungs. "Merger? What merger?" They were talking about our company, my life's work. And then I looked through the crack. They were standing by the fireplace. Julian took her hand and ran his thumb across her palm. It wasn't the gesture of a friend or colleague. It was the gesture of an owner. "Soon all this will be ours," he whispered. Alara looked up at him, and in her eyes I saw not love, but desire. Desire for power, money, something that I apparently couldn't give her. Translated with deepel.com, free version. "The main thing is that he doesn't understand anything before the trip to the mountains," she said. "After that, it won't matter anymore." I stepped back, quiet as a shadow. The box with the necklace in my hand suddenly felt unbearably heavy. I came home to celebrate our past, but instead I saw their plan for my future. Or rather, for its absence. At that moment I realized they weren't just cheating on me. They were going to destroy me. I didn't burst into the room. I didn't make a scene. Something inside me froze, turning the shock into a cold, ringing emptiness. I quietly left the house, got in my car, and drove away. An hour later, I returned as if nothing had happened, with a bouquet of her favorite white peonies. "Sorry, I was held up at work," I said, kissing her on the cheek. She smiled, but her eyes quickly scanned me, assessing me. "It's okay, honey. Are you tired?" "A little," I lied. I wasn't tired. I was furious. I didn't sleep that night. While Alara breathed peacefully beside me, I lay with my eyes open, replaying their words in my head. A trip to the mountains. Our annual corporate retreat. In 2 weeks. What were they up to? The next day, I started digging. I was the company's founder, its architect. I had access to everything. I logged into the system with my administrator password and delved into the digital depths of our business. First, I checked Julian and Alara's corporate email. Nothing revealing. They were too smart for that. Then I went deeper, into the server logs, into the archives of deleted files. And there I found what I was looking for. They had created several shell companies registered to offshore accounts. Through these firms, they were slowly siphoning money out of our main business under the guise of paying for non-existent services. It was preparation for a merger, a hostile takeover that would leave me with worthless shares, while all the real assets would pass under their control. But the worst part was something else. I found their personal correspondence on a hidden email service. Hundreds of messages full of not only passion, but also contempt for me. They laughed at my clothes, my habits, my naivety. "Workhorse," Julian called me in one of the letters. "He won't even notice when we take everything from him," Alara replied. Every word was like a blow. I sat in a dark office, staring at the screen, and felt the world I had been building for 10 years crumbling. Love, trust, friendship, it was all a lie. And this lie was carefully planned. They didn't just want to rob me. They wanted to wipe me out. I thought I had hit rock bottom, but beneath it was another, even darker level of betrayal. As I continued digging, I stumbled upon a project I had been personally leading, Prometheus. It was an innovative security system, my magnum opus, which was supposed to revolutionize the market. I noticed that there had been a lot of minor, inexplicable problems with it lately. Now I understood why. In the logs, I found traces of sabotage. Someone had deliberately introduced microscopic errors into the code that were almost impossible to track down. Errors that would lead to a catastrophic system failure during a public demonstration. The demonstration was scheduled for a month later, right after they planned to kick me out of the company. They didn't just want to take my business, they wanted to destroy my reputation, turn my greatest achievement into my greatest shame. But even that wasn't the worst part. I found the final nail in the coffin of my trust in the HR files. Several months ago, Julian, as managing partner, initiated a review of corporate insurance policies. My life insurance was increased 5-fold. The sole beneficiary was listed as Alara. All the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. A trip to the mountains. A picturesque serpentine road. My habit of driving my old but beloved sports car. Suddenly, everything took on a sinister meaning. I went into the search history on our shared tablet, which Alara sometimes used. The searches from the last few weeks made my blood run cold. Brake failure on a mountain road, most common causes of car accidents, arrival time of rescue services in remote areas. They didn't just want me to disappear from their lives. They wanted me to disappear forever. And they had already rehearsed how it would look. The moment I saw the search queries, the grief inside me died. In its place, something cold, hard, and sharp as a scalpel was born. I was no longer a victim. I had become a hunter. Psychologists call this a transition from a fight or flight response to a state of cold empathy, when emotions give way to strategic calculation. The first thing I did was call David Sterling. David was an old-school lawyer, a friend of my father's. He was like a bulldog, short, stocky, with a reputation for sinking his teeth into a case and not letting go until he had torn his opponent's throat out. "I need your help, David," I said when we met in his dusty office, cluttered with volumes of law books. "I need to draw up a new will. An ironclad one." I told him everything. Without emotion, just stating the facts. He listened silently, his gaze growing increasingly stern. When I finished, he nodded. "They underestimated you, Arthur. That will be their fatal mistake." We worked on the document for 3 days. It was a masterpiece of legal acrobatics. The main point was simple: my entire estate, including the controlling stake in the company, would go into an irrevocable trust fund after my death. But the devil was in the details. The sole purpose of this fund was to finance an independent organization dedicated to investigating and prosecuting corporate fraud and economic crimes. I was essentially bequeathing all my money to a team of professional bounty hunters who specialized in people like Julian and Alara. And now for the cherry on top. This clause only came into effect under one condition: if my death within a year was deemed by the authorities to be unnatural or suspicious. If my death was deemed an accident without any questions asked, Alara would receive a symbolic sum of $1, and the rest would go to my distant cousin in Oregon, whom I had seen twice in my life. David smiled when we finished. "That's brilliant," he said. "You're giving the police the most powerful incentive to investigate thoroughly. A fortune is at stake." But I went even further. I created a dead man switch, a mechanism common in the digital world that automatically performs an action if the user stops confirming their activity. An encrypted data package containing all the evidence I had gathered, correspondence, financial reports, search history, was uploaded to a secure server. 48 hours after my death was officially registered, this package would automatically be sent to the police, the board of directors, and leading business publications. I had set the stage. Now all that remained was to play my final role. I went to the corporate party. Elara and Julian were charming. They acted as if nothing was happening, asked me if I was too tired, and offered me drinks. I played my part, the part of a tired, slightly detached workaholic, completely absorbed in the problems with the Prometheus project. They bought it. "Are you sure you want to drive your old Mustang?" Elara asked with feigned concern. "The road is so winding. Why don't you come with us?" "No," I replied. "I want to get some fresh air, be alone." That was exactly what they wanted to hear. The mountain serpentine was picturesque and dangerous. I drove the car, feeling every turn. I knew this road, knew my car like the back of my hand. And I knew they were following me. Julian's black SUV kept its distance, but I could see it in the rearview mirror. They were waiting for the right moment, a blind turn over a cliff. I was waiting for it too. When I approached the designated point, I did something they could not have anticipated. I slammed on the brakes, but at the same time pulled the hidden lever for the manual brake fluid release that I had installed the day before. Smoke billowed from under the wheels, and the car skidded. It looked like a classic brake failure. The Mustang broke through the flimsy guardrail and flew down the cliff. But I was no longer inside. A split second before the car fell off the cliff, I jumped out, using a pre-prepared climbing safety harness attached to the rock below the road. I hung a few meters below, hidden from their view by a rock ledge. I heard them stop. I heard their excited voices, in which triumph broke through the false panic. They didn't come down. Why? The deed was done. A few minutes later, they drove away to report the tragic accident. And I was left hanging over the abyss, listening to my old life burning out below. The cold wind ruffled my hair, but inside me there was absolute calm. The show had begun. David Sterling's office smelled of old leather and victories. Elara and Julian sat across from him. She wore an elegant black couture dress, her hair perfectly styled, her face mournful, though she couldn't hide the sparkle in her eyes. He wore an expensive suit, confident and relaxed. They were one step away from everything they had ever dreamed of. David put on his glasses and began to read. His voice was monotonous, emotionless. He listed insignificant assets, small donations. Elara tapped her fingers impatiently on the armrest of her chair. "And now," David said, pausing, "let's move on to the main assets, including the controlling stake in Prometheus Innovations." Elar leaned forward. Julian smiled smugly. "All of my principal estate," David read, "I bequeath to the Irrevocable Trust Fund Themis." Julian's smile faltered. Elara frowned. "What is this fund?" she asked. "The sole purpose of this fund," David continued imperturbably, "is to finance the investigation and prosecution of complex cases of corporate fraud, economic crimes, and conspiracies that have resulted in significant financial or human losses." Silence fell over the room. The ticking of the antique clock on the wall could be heard. "Is this some kind of joke?" Julian hissed. "I'm not finished yet," David said, giving him a cold stare. "This clause of the will shall only take effect if my death is deemed by the investigating authorities to be unnatural or to have occurred under suspicious circumstances. If within 1 year my death is classified as an accident beyond doubt, my wife, Elara Crawford, shall receive $1, and the rest of my estate shall pass to my cousin, Samuel Price. Wills with such conditions, although complex, are a perfectly legal instrument as long as the conditions do not contradict public order." Elara's face turned white as a sheet. She slowly turned to Julian, and her eyes flashed with horror. They had fallen into a trap. A perfectly designed, inescapable trap. If they were found guilty, they would go to prison, and my money would be used to destroy people like them. If they were acquitted and the death was ruled accidental, they would get nothing. Absolutely nothing. David took off his glasses. "The investigation has already begun," he said calmly. "And, given the circumstances, it will be very, very thorough. I'm sure you have a lot to talk about." I was sitting on the terrace of a small cafe in Portofino, overlooking the turquoise waters of the Ligurian Sea. The morning sun was warm and the espresso was strong. An article from the Wall Street Journal was open on my tablet screen. The headline read, "Tech mogul Arthur Vance may have been the victim of a conspiracy. A devil's will has surfaced in the case." The article described in detail how a tragic accident turned into one of the most high-profile corporate fraud cases. An anonymous source, my dead man's switch, worked flawlessly, leaked all the information to the press and the FBI, shell companies, financial machinations, correspondence between Ilara and Julian. Their assets were frozen. They were interrogated every day. Their perfect world was collapsing before the eyes of the entire country. They were in a hell of their own making. In a prison without bars, where every phone call made them flinch, and every glance from a passerby seemed like the gaze of an investigator. They could neither prove their innocence without fear of losing everything, nor hope to be found guilty. I finished my coffee. For the first time in months, I felt neither anger nor pain. Only silence. I didn't seek revenge. I just gave them the rope, and they made the noose themselves. I closed my tablet. A whole day lay ahead of me, a whole life. A life I had taken back for myself. I looked at the sea, at the bright houses clinging to the cliffs, and smiled. Not triumphantly. Just like a man who had survived a storm and finally saw a clear sky. I was free. And that was worth more than any amount of money.